Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Anne and today I'm going to show you my May TBR. The thing is, I don't yet know what my May TBR is because rather on a whim I came up with a little project for May and I asked some of my friends to send in a book they think I should read because they loved it and they think I will love it too. And I asked all of them to send me an email with the title Secret Book. I asked them to tell me why they wanted me to read the book in a couple of sentences, and I haven't seen the emails yet. Although that's not entirely true, I accidentally saw my mother's email and I think I know what the book is she sent me. But other than that, I haven't seen the emails. I asked both of my parents to send me a book because they're the reason I love reading. So they should get to tell me what to read at least one time. I asked my boyfriend to send in a book and I asked three friends to send in a book as well. So now I'm going to open the emails on camera and see what books they've chosen for me. And then later on in this video I'll come back to you with the books as I've gathered them and tell you what they're about and tell you my expectations. So the first book I'm going to look at is the book my mother sent in, and she has sent Haroun and the Sea of Stories by SALMAN RUSHDIE, and this is the one I thought I saw. She says it's only 211 pages, so if I don't like it I won't have to spend too much time on it. And she says she really enjoyed it because Rushdie shows himself to be an amazing storyteller with a very big imagination. And she says she only knew SALMAN RUSHDIE because of these satanic verses, which is of course why he is very well known as well. And why there was a fatwa declared on him. I don't know if that's how you say it in English, but there you are. But she says when you read this, so Haroun and the Sea of Stories, you can't imagine that this is the same writer who has had so much backlash. I have heard a lot about this already because my mother told me about it, and this is not a book I would have picked up on my own, I think. And it's a little bit different because I think it might be short stories in one big narrative, but I'm not sure about that. So yeah, I'm excited to read this one. The next book I received was my father's book, and he has sent me A Different Drummer by William Melvin Kelly. I don't know anything about this book. Let's see what he has written about it. It's from 1962 and it's an old book, but my father only read it last year. He says, I really love this book. The author is described on the cover as the lost giant of American literature. The story is situated in the south of the USA and it plays in 1957, and it's all about interactions between the white and the black people in a small town. And some very weird things happen. I find it hard to explain exactly what struck me. That's something I'm not good at in general, so you definitely have not inherited that from me, he says. The topic of the racial interactions in the south of the USA, though, is a topic I find interesting to read about. So my father told me that I would never be able to guess what book he'd tell me to read, and that's definitely true. I think I heard him talk about this on a few occasions, but he didn't talk about it at length, so I don't know that much about it. But I'm also always interested in books on racial relations in the USA. So I think this will be a good read, and I'm excited to read this one as well. The next book I received is a book by my best friend Aline, and that one is The Buried Giant by Kazuo Ishiguro. And that's exciting because I actually own that book. Here it is, but let's see what she has to say about it. She actually wrote a very long piece of text on this, but I'm just going to read the entire thing to you. Or maybe I'll edit something out. We'll see. She says, okay, so I know this is on your shelves already, so you would have gotten around to it eventually, although we both know how that goes. That's true. But I kept returning to this book as the perfect recommendation from me to you. Kazuo Ishiguro is one of my favorite writers. I've now read 5 of his books, and they are always completely different. He's written science fiction, historical fiction, Kafkaesque-ish stuff, and in The Buried Giant, fantasy/history, but at the same time you always recognize his style and his themes. He's the only writer I know who manages that, being recognizable in his themes but continually reinventing himself genre-wise. I thought he absolutely deserved a Nobel Prize for Literature, and she's very happy it didn't go to Murakami instead. So obviously after you finish reading this one, I expect you to immediately pick up The Remains of the Day and Never Let Me Go. And then she says, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The reason I'm recommending The Buried Giant to you, as you might have gathered, is because I'm a medievalist and you're a fan of Arthurian legend, and we are watching Merlin together. The Buried Giant takes place in the 5th and 6th century in Britain, just after the wars that the British leader Arthur fought against the Saxons. The novel focuses not on the valiant Arthurian knights, as most books and movies do, but on an elderly couple, Axel and Beatrice, who vaguely remember that they once had a son and go in search of him. Their journey takes them through the post-war landscape upon which has descended a mysterious mist. I find it very difficult to say whether you'll love this book as much as I did. We know from your experience with Lord of the Rings that a medieval-inspired writing style isn't always your cup of tea, although this is very different, but you're allowed to hate it. At least we can then finally discuss the book. Have fun, love, Aline. Okay, so I'm very excited to read this. I picked this up a few years ago and Aline has always told me to read it, so I'm glad she's now actually forcing me to read this. I've heard some mixed things about this as well. Like Aline said, I'm not the biggest fan of the Lord of the Rings, so if this is similar to that in writing style, it might go the same way, but I don't really think it is. I have read quite a few medieval texts because I've studied English literature and medieval texts are a part of that as well. I did always enjoy those texts and those courses, so hopefully I'll enjoy this too. And maybe afterwards I'll read Never Let Me Go and The Remains of the Day, but we'll see. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Next up is my friend Marike, and she wants me to read My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite. And she said she was going to look at my Goodreads to make sure she picked a book that I hadn't read yet. And I think she did that early yesterday, because I actually added this book yesterday evening because I started reading it yesterday as well. I started listening to the audiobook and I only listened to about 20 minutes. So I'll stop listening to it right now and start again when May rolls around. I did actually hope that there would be one book in this mix that I would be able to listen to on audiobook, because that will make reading 6 books a little easier. So this is actually a really good pick because I did want to read this book. Let's see what her motivation is. She says, I just thought this was a really entertaining and refreshing read. Fast-paced yet complex, morbidly funny, and with a strong main character. What's not to like? I loved it. Oh, and the audiobook is great too. Well, that's perfect. The next book is actually a book that my boyfriend picked out, and he's sitting right there watching my reaction, so let's see how this goes. He picked for me The Great Night by Chris Adrian, which is a book we already own. This is also a book I still want to read, so this is turning out quite nice. He says this was my favorite book of last year, and he hopes that I will enjoy it a lot as well. This is in Dutch, so I'm translating in my head, which is why it might come out a little slow. It's a magical realism type story about 3 young people who struggle with heartache and who meet each other in a park in San Francisco, where all kinds of things end up happening that are a little strange. We learn a lot about the characters, their pasts, and the way they live their lives. And Chris Adrian knows how to word this very beautifully. The human drama is framed by A Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare's play, and it is woven through the storylines in ingenious ways, and it also adds magic with a twist. Chris Adrian is a pretty unknown author, but it would be good if he'll get a bit more attention this way, and other people might be inspired by my vlog to read the book as well. He's curious to find out what I'll think of the book and if I like it just as much as he did, and this way I won't have to buy the book. My boyfriend sometimes has criticism on my book buying habits, so this is a little jab to that. Well, I'm excited to read this book, I'll just get it. Here it is, so that's one less book to gather or get my hands on. I probably would have read this at some point, but it might have been this year, it might have been in 5 years' time. So this is a good way to force me to read it. And then the last email is from my friend Jitske, and I know she's actually sent me a couple of options so I can choose from them, so that's exciting. There are 2 options. Jitske sent me The Edible Woman by Margaret Atwood and Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid. I have heard about the second one, but I don't know anything about it. I haven't heard of The Edible Woman, but of course I have heard of Margaret Atwood, and I've read some of her books. So let's see what Jitske has to say about them. About The Edible Woman, she says, "This is Atwood's first novel, which in some ways is evident from the storytelling. Still, it's a strong first book with a theme that is still relevant today, more than 50 years later. I dedicated a chapter of my thesis on this book, and it's pretty much where the idea of the whole thesis started." And she says, if you're not keen on reading a 50 years old book, my other recommendation is Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid. I kid you not, I read this book pretty much in one sitting. Wow, that's impressive. I just wanted to know what would happen. It's an interesting take on race and class in contemporary America, but it's more than that. The premise is a young black woman who gets stopped in a supermarket while babysitting a white child. I thought this book would be something completely different than it is, but I wasn't disappointed. It's about being a 20-something dealing with society's expectations and feeling kind of lost and left out. Something a lot of people our age can relate to. That sounds really interesting, but I'm just going to look up the synopsis for The Edible Woman as well, just so I can make a good decision between these two books. And I'll get back to you a little later when I've gathered all of these books. It's now the next day and I have already managed to acquire all of the books. I had 2 of them myself, 2 of them I could borrow from my parents, and then one of them I ordered yesterday with my local bookstore and it arrived today, so that's perfect. And the 6th one, of course, I have on audiobook. So I looked at all of the books, so now I know a little bit better what I'm in for. First up we have Haroun and the Sea of Stories by SALMAN RUSHDIE. I think I said I thought this was multiple short stories, but it's actually a novel, and it's a children's novel and also a fantasy novel. It features magicians and talking animals, and it's about Haroun, who sets out on an adventure and a journey to restore the poisoned source of the Sea of Stories. And on the way he meets all kinds of different foes who want to drain the sea of all of its storytelling powers. And that sounds like a lot of fun, like a good adventure book. So I'm quite excited to read this. I think I'm going to read this in the middle of the month because it's one of the shorter books and it's a children's novel, so I think it will be a bit of a quick read. So hopefully it'll be a nice palate cleanser after some of the other books. And then we have A Different Drummer by William Melvin Kelly. This book actually has the highest average rating on Goodreads. It has a 4.25 rating, so that's really good. This was written in 1962, but it was kind of rediscovered in 2017 when a journalist stumbled upon it basically and wrote an article on it for The New Yorker, and then in 2018 it was republished because the article, I think, caused quite a storm, and the journalist talked about William Melvin Kelly as being the lost giant of American literature, and in his time he was actually compared to James Baldwin and William Faulkner, but apparently over time people just forgot about him. And this novel is set in 1957 when a young black farmer shoots all of his livestock, sets fire to his house and leaves basically, and with him all of the other black Americans, Afro-Americans also leave. And then I think it says, the reaction to this mass exodus comes from the white townsfolk who remain, and they have to deal and explain with this spontaneous rejection of subordination. This actually sounds really interesting, and I think this is going to be the first one I pick up, because after reading the back and reading some stuff on Goodreads, I'm actually really intrigued by this. Then there's The Buried Giant, which Alina already explained sufficiently, I think. This has been on my TBR for a long time. I don't know much more about it than what Alina told me and you, but I'm really excited to read it. Then we have The Great Night by Chris Adrian. I actually noticed on Goodreads that none of my friends have read this or added this to their TBR, so it's really quite an unknown book, like my boyfriend already said in his motivation. Because this is based on A Midsummer Night's Dream, I have decided to reread Shakespeare's play A Midsummer Night's Dream. I started doing that yesterday. I'm listening to the audiobook, which is with a full cast, and I'm reading along with it in my complete Shakespeare. So that's a nice preparation for reading this book. It also makes me really excited to read this. Like I already said before, this book is set in a park when 3 people get stuck there, but what I didn't say before is that Titania and Oberon live there, and Titania sets free Puck, who is malevolent and vengeful, and then these mortals, these three mortals, have to deal with the consequences of that while they are stuck in that park. It sounds really exciting. The only thing I'm not looking forward to is the fact that the font in this book is really, really small. And I have pretty bad eyes, so I'll probably be reading this during the daytime more often than at night, because my eyes will struggle. But other than that, I'm looking forward to reading this. And then the last book I have a physical copy of is Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid. This is the one I ordered, and so this is also the one I ended up choosing. I'm not going with the Atwood one, because I think it will be more fun to read a book by a debut author instead of yet another Atwood book. This book features a lot of empathy and social commentary I read on Goodreads, which is exactly what I like in a book. Another one I'm definitely looking forward to. And then lastly there's My Sister the Serial Killer, the audiobook I had already started. I listened to a couple of chapters. The audiobook has very short chapters and it's about two sisters. One of them is called Koreide and the other is called Ayola, I think. And Ayola is the serial killer. She has murdered a couple of her boyfriends already, and Koreide has been there to clean up the mess basically. And we see the story from Koreide's point of view, and she's dealing with the person her sister has started to become, and she struggles with what she has to do with that. And I know a lot of people in the book community have really enjoyed this book. I enjoyed the first few chapters, so I'm excited to start it again and then read it based on the recommendation of my friend. So these are all the books I'm going to be reading in May. I'm going to be vlogging the experience so that I can document what I'm thinking of the books while I'm reading them, and so my friends can also see that. I hope they'll enjoy it as well. I hope I will like all of these books, so I won't have to trash any of their favorites. I'm really glad that I'm actually looking forward to reading all of these. There's not one book in the mix that I'm a little apprehensive about. These are all books I think I would have picked up at one point or another. The only difference with my usual reading month is that there is no young adult here, but there is a children's book, so that's fun as well. I think this is going to turn out to be a really nice experiment. I hope I will find a new favorite book as well. Who knows? I'm excited about the reading month ahead of me, and I hope you'll come along with me on the journey. So that was it for today's video. Please tell me what you were planning on reading in May. And please like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you want to see more of my videos. And have a wonderful day. Bye!